Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Clearing the Air on Agricultural Policy. This is a monthly podcast presentation of the Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag and Food Policy, a national leader in policy analysis and education. The topic we've decided to bring up today, very much timely, always is, and very much at the epicenter of just about anything agricultural policy, that is, the status of the federal farm bill. And the ebb and flow of the farm bill process has seemed to have changed over the last few years. We want to talk about that. All of our participants today are very well attuned to all matters farm bill, and we are in for what promises to be a thought-provoking and insightful session, looking very much forward to thoughts on where the Farm Bill is and where it's headed. Before I introduce our featured guest today, I want to once again reintroduce to you our regular panel. Professor Emeritus and longtime agricultural and rural policy specialist out of Iowa State University, Mark Edelman, Associate Extension Professor and Agriculture and Public Policy Specialist out of the University of Nebraska, Dr. Brad Lubin, and Associate Professor and Extension Specialist and the Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair at Kansas State University, Dr. Jennifer Ift. Incidentally, my name is Eric Atkinson. I'm your host, and I'm from Kansas State University as well. And we'll hear from Mark and we'll hear from Brad in just a few moments, as well as Jenny shortly here. But we do want to introduce briefly to you our featured guest. She is the Executive Vice President for the Tory Advisory Group based in Washington, D.C., Tara Smith. Tara is the head of a team of agricultural advocacy experts. She brings experience from both the public and the private sectors. She spent time working for Monsanto, served as the Director of Government Affairs for the American Farm Bureau Federation, and was on the staff of the Senate Agriculture Committee, senior professional staff, as a matter of fact, during a critical revamping of the Farm Safety Net. She is a self-described proud farm kid from the state of Illinois, has a bachelor's degree from Davidson College in Political Science and a master's of Business Administration from the University of Michigan. And she resides in Washington, D.C., very well versed in the areas of forestry policy, crop insurance policy, commodities policy, and, of course, farm bill policy. We'll turn it on over to Jenny now as she launches our conversation with a few questions for Tara, and looking very much forward to this discussion. Jenny?
All right. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Tara, so much for joining us. First of all, by my count, you've worked on about 6 farm bills and several other important pieces of legislation. I'm curious if I got that right. And also, do you have a least favorite or a least favorite farm bill or something else that you'd like to share that you've worked on?
You got it right. 6 is right. My first farm bill was as an intern, so I am counting that one. When I was up here in 1995 as an intern working in agriculture, it was the first time I met Pat Roberts, actually, who was chairman of the House Ag Committee at the time. Do I have a favorite? That's like asking you to choose among your children, but they're all a little redheaded and all a little stepchildren. They all have their own personalities. This one, without a doubt, has been a bit of a challenge. So, and being in the thick of this one now, this has probably been one of the more difficult we've been through.
All right. And so before we dig in, I'd like to just discuss what the farm bill is. And maybe after doing 6 farm bills, you've learned how to explain it succinctly. I've struggled. It's a omnibus bill, a massive spending bill, a jobs bill, a safety net for farms and for people that might go hungry, and the land. How do you encapsulate what the farm bill is?
Yeah, it's a big bill. I think the first thing you have to remind folks is that it's not just about farmers, right? It's more than just the farm safety net. Because I think when you talk to folks who don't really fully know a lot about the farm bill, that's the first place their mind goes because it says farm bill. But it's really so much more than that, right? It's a research bill. It is a nutrition bill. It's a forestry bill. Sure, it has the farm safety net included as well, but there's really a lot more to it than that. And really, I think the farm bill in some way, shape, or form touches everybody in the United States. Maybe it's a research project that impacts their life. Maybe it's, their rural wastewater system got upgraded through a rural development grant. It could be a lot of different things, but I think it touches pretty much everyone across America.
Yeah, absolutely. And recently I've hear a lot about the term people are longing for normal order. We want to go back to normal order. And I'm curious, what exactly does normal order mean? And I've also been told normal order wasn't always pretty. But how long did we have this normal order?
Yeah, I mean, normal order, I think of Schoolhouse Rock, right? Like what we all learned, you're going to have
Mm.
markups and hearings, and then it's going to go to the floor in both the House and the Senate, and you're going to have this conference committee, and we're going to hash everything out. And, that process in and of itself, to your point, Jenny, is not easy. And it's not always the prettiest. It still involves a lot of fights, a lot of arguments, having to make a lot of compromises to get something across the finish line. That's the nature. That's why they, talk about it being sausage making here in DC. But at least the process was one you could kind of follow and you knew what the next step was. I think a lot of the frustration today is that process has kind of broken down in the Washington that we're in today. We haven't had a real conference committee for the Farm Bill probably since the 2014 bill, where we actually had people sitting around the room in a public setting, hashing out the differences between the House bill and the Senate bill. We've kind of gotten in this habit of, final legislation gets negotiated by leadership of the House Ag Committee, leadership of the House and the Senate, and that's it. They call them gangs of 8 here in DC, but it's a less predictable process. It leads to less transparency, I think, at the end of the day for everyone involved in the process. And I think it can just generally be pretty frustrating along the way. So I think that's where everyone's longing for the past,
Yeah.
which was, like I
Yeah.
said, also kind of difficult. So
Yeah, right. And right now we have had 3 extensions of the 2018 Farm Bill. And I think 1 or 2 could happen in the past. I don't think 3 has ever happened before. Maybe you could correct me on that. We had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in July, which was not a farm bill. I think a few people tried to call it a farm bill a few times, and now we're sort of back at the same discussion. Does
yeah.
that sort of capture it?
Yeah, it does. And it's funny, this is the longest we've had to extend a previous farm bill, but it's not the most times, oddly
Okay.
enough.
What's the
Back in,
most?
back in 2007, 2008, we were
Yeah.
doing like 2-month extensions
Gosh. Are
because
you serious?
yeah, I think it was Chairman Peterson at the time in the House was trying to
Okay.
pressure the Senate and Chairman Harkin to get a bill done. And so we were doing, couple month extensions, hoping that the Senate would get their work done. And, so I think we had 6 or 7 extensions, but they didn't last that long. It was over a much shorter period of times. Like I said, every farm bill has its own
Yeah.
personality and takes its own unique path
Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
extensions are less than ideal for
Yeah.
everyone involved. They're less than ideal
Right.
for farmers. They don't bring a lot of certainty and they don't allow for that opportunity to be flexible in our farm policy as the situation changes on the ground.
Right. Right. And now they're working towards negotiating a new farm bill. And I'd have to say, what I see in the media, public statements of people working on it, it sounds somewhat optimistic. Outside of that, I'm hearing more pessimism. So I'm curious where you think things are at.
Yeah, optimism tends to wane on year 3 or so of extensions. That feels pretty natural along the way. Chairman G.T. Thompson is the best cheerleader anybody could ask for, right? He's always just this ray of sunshine and optimism and hopes that we're going to get the bill done. I will say that I think we're feeling momentum now that we haven't felt in 3 years, right? We're about to get, we hope, to a point that we haven't been able to get to in the last 3 years, which is going to the floor. We've marked up in House Ag before, but we've never gone to the floor. And so if they really do hold to the agenda for next week and we actually do take the House Farm Bill to the floor, I think we're going to have a bit of momentum. I think the hope is then that when you hand the bill off to the Senate, that they can maintain that momentum. And I think that's, a little
Right.
bit to be determined.
Yeah. Right. 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 Well, we'll have to wait and see, I guess.
I'm at more than 50-50 odds right now.
That's pretty
So
good. That's
I
pretty good.
I don't I don't think I've been there in a couple years.
Right.
Feeling better than I have been.
All right. So I got one last question before we switch to the group discussion. What do you hear about the downsides of being outside of normal order, having so many extensions? I mean, now so many of the programs are permanent, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. But yeah, I'm curious, what are the main messages you get about the downsides of this equilibrium we're in right now?
Y- Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. I think on the process side, it's really hard when this process, the Farm Bill process, breaks down because in the meantime, other processes then sort of take over. So, for example, it means that we end up leaving a lot of our farm policy up to an administration. And administrations change. We saw an administration change in the midst of when we should have been writing a farm bill. And you can see sort of whiplashes in policy and policy interpretation with new administrations that if perhaps we had new farm legislation might moderate those kinds of ebbs and flows. But I think, in terms of policy, it's also really problematic. We don't need to do a farm bill every year. Situations on the ground in agriculture, they change, maybe not as fast as every single year, but I think every 5 years is a really appropriate time frame for us to be revisiting whether or not we're in a different situation now than we were 5 years ago. I would argue we're in a very different situation now than we were 5 years ago. And it's really helpful to revisit those policies and ask tough questions. What should our farm policy be covering? What do farmers need? What does rural America need right now? What do nutrition programs need? And when you don't do a farm bill every 5 years, all of that stuff gets punted. We're basically pretending like it's still 2018 and it's not 2018. And so all of rural America sort of gets left behind when we don't get that work done. And reconciliation is a tool, right? You can use reconciliation to do some things, but I think reconciliation tends to be very politicizing, which we try really hard not to do in agriculture and on the Ag Committee. It's always been a very bipartisan committee. So using reconciliation in terms of the process isn't a great tool, but I also think there are limits around reconciliation. You can only add or subtract money and you can't create new policy unless it's tax policy. So those are some pretty limiting factors. Just to put it in context, our last farm bill was about 550 pages, give or take. The reconciliation package was 40. So when you try to replace 500 pages of legislation with 40 pages, you're going to leave a lot of good stuff on the cutting room floor. So it's just not the ideal way to get things done. I think we owe better.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do want to bring Mark and Brad in for the discussion as well, but briefly before we do, Tara, just as a for the record, if nothing else, you're optimistic that the bill may hit the floor here soon. What are some of the key elements for the layperson, if nothing else, that you would highlight that may take this bill beyond just another extension?
Yeah. And I think, it's important to note, first of all, we've actually seen it get to the point where we're filing amendments for the floor. So amendments were due on Wednesday. So we actually have the universe of amendments that the Rules Committee will consider on Monday. Again, a meeting that's actually scheduled to take place to move us to the next step. Rules Committee is where they decide what amendments are actually going to get votes and what amendments aren't going to get votes. Team has also scheduled a meeting for farm organizations to come in and make their pitch for the Farm Bill to the conference on Wednesday. These are all really positive things that kind of tell you that there's momentum and they're very serious about taking this bill up next week. So I think that's what's giving me a little bit more optimism right now is we're seeing action that we haven't seen taken before.
Mark, Brad?
Yeah, I would ask a question. My understanding is Barry always used to say that one thing that keeps the Farm Bill keep coming up every 4 or 5 years or so is that if we don't do anything, we revert to permanent legislation back in I think in 1949 or something like that, when permanent legislation was passed. Is that still operational? And is that part of what's driving us forward, either in extensions or passing new legislation?
Yeah, permanent law still exists. We've come really close to sort of breaching that dam, if you will, and pushing it right over the edge. And that's a pretty scary prospect because, quite frankly, USDA has absolutely no idea how to implement permanent law. Not to speak for USDA, but it's pretty scary stuff, right? It's putting acreage limits and allotments in place and things on acreage that existed in 1940.
Parity prices.
Parity pricing. I mean, this is stuff that just doesn't fit with our agriculture system today. So I think USDA would have a heck of a time. I think also your average consumer would have a heck of a time with permanent law. You think about milk pricing, for example, it would suddenly have parity pricing, and milk prices in the grocery store would increase astronomically under permanent law. So it still is a hammer to get something done. Unfortunately, sometimes the getting something done is an extension.
Tara, I would build on that. I would pose that it's still a hammer. You're right. USDA recognizes, I think everybody recognizes that reverting to permanent legislation sort of fails every logical test.
Yep.
Economics, politics, feasibility, et cetera, it can't be done. But yet that language remains, that clause remains to say, get something done or we revert. To my knowledge, we haven't seen an effort to try and repeal that clause as part of a modern farm bill. And I presume that's been an effort amongst the Ag Committee leaders to protect that clause to ensure that they do have a hammer the next time around. Is that how it's continued to live indefinitely in modern farm bills?
Yeah, every once in a while, somebody will get frustrated and say, we should just get rid of permanent law. Having to do these extensions all the time isn't worthwhile. But those comments tend to come in the heat of the moment, has been my experience, not necessarily grounded in really thinking through a good policy option. Because again, if we just get rid of permanent law and we don't force Congress to sort of take a look at farm policy every 5 years, I mean, think about what that means. If we hadn't forced them at the beginning to look at this every 5 years, we could still be in parity pricing, for heaven's sake. So
well, we do have, if we look in other policy arenas, you have major multi-year authorization bills that
that's right.
when they expire, and Congress is sort of left with, we can continue to throw appropriations at the old version, but we can't do something new until we get a new reauthorization done.
Yep.
Yeah, Ag needs to address that more regularly. Having said that, I would also note, if you go back to the 2014 Farm Bill, it's when we introduced ARC and PLC, those price versus revenue-based safety net choices. Since the budget reconciliation bill in 2025 extended those through 2031, I've noted that we will now likely live with ARC and PLC as the core commodity program safety net longer than we will have worked with anything since the target price deficiency payment programs of pre-1996.
Uh-huh.
So, in fact, ARC and PLC have sort of become the new semi-permanent farm bill, if I can coin that, or at least steal that phrase. Are we likely to move anywhere except sort of modest changes in maybe levels or decisions? Are we likely to move anywhere except stay with ARC and PLC going forward?
Personally, I hope over the course of the next few years between this farm bill, again, let's be optimistic, this farm bill, and the next one, I hope we all spend some quality time at the university level within different farm organizations, really taking a hard look at the farm safety net. Because I have to tell you that when we are spending, I don't know, what are we at, $14-15 billion a year in ad hoc assistance since 2018, when we're spending more money on ad hoc assistance than we are on the core safety net, I would argue that we probably got something wrong. We may need to evaluate what we're doing and how we're doing it. And maybe the increases in the reconciliation package will do the trick. I just am not sure they're meeting that will meet the moment. When I hear about the concerns on the countryside, I'm hearing things about input pricing. I'm hearing a lot of different concerns about tariff pricing and things like that I'm not sure ARC and PLC were really ever meant to tackle. So I'm just hopeful that we'll spend some time really doing a little introspection over the course of the next few years to figure out where we need to go.
That's an interesting point. I was an intern in Senator Dole's office back in 1980, and that was crop insurance versus ad hoc disaster assistance was the major debate that summer at that point in time. Of course, that was before the farm crisis of the 80s came along, and it simply got washed out by PIC, and finally we had to bump up CRP to solve sort of the imbalance at that time. But one of the things that's happened since 2000 is the biofuels growth, and at least coming from Iowa, that's been the major change in rural economy during my professional career. I'm now retired, but I note that is one of the amendments that's in front of everybody, and I'm kind of wondering. I hear optimism and maybe perhaps a little bit of pessimism on the Senate side. And I don't know. Do you give odds on prospects of amendments, or do you stay out of that gamesmanship?
Yeah, now you're getting pretty granular, but I think there are 3 or 4 or 5 amendments on E15 and the RFS, and it is everything from eliminating the RFS to, I think there are a couple of different E15 fixes that have been put on the table. And so I think there's a lot of desire to get something across the finish line there. I think Bozeman has expressed a willingness that if it can't get done in the House, that they're willing to do it in the Senate. I think one of the challenges that they have right now is going into the House floor, they feel like they have the votes for the bill that exists today. But then you go into this amendment process, and every amendment that passes is either going to add or subtract from your vote count. And they are working on really slim margins right now. And we saw this in 2013, where you were in good shape for floor passage. The final amendment to come up is one that Chairman Lucas opposed. He knew was going to blow up the bill. They brought it to the floor anyway, and sure enough, that amendment passed and it blew up the bill. So I think right now they're just trying to keep really close tabs on, okay, any amendment we pass, is it going to be additive or is it going to take away votes at the end of the day? And that's where I don't feel like I necessarily have a great whip count, Mark. I just don't know if it's additive or not. I think it'll be very difficult for them to get through this process without voting on at least one E15 amendment. That's just my gut.
I'd like to go back to the permanent programs a little bit. So I think maybe one thing that takes some of the pressure away is that crop insurance is permanent. Nutrition programs are permanent. Some other things may be. What if nothing was permanent? I'm not sure it's feasible, but if nothing was permanent, seems like it would speed things, change things a bit.
You just gave me a little bit of a heart attack. That is very scary to me.
Yeah.
In part because I still do a lot of work on crop insurance. And one of the things that we always talk about is that we are permanent. And so no matter what, a farmer doesn't have to worry about that in September. I totally get that. As they're harvesting their crop.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think that if it weren't permanent, it would light a fire.
Yeah.
There would be a different level of pressure for sure.
Terry, you described, I know you well, and your work in crop insurance and at the agency there and your expertise. How does crop insurance today, fit with the commodity programs and with both the standing and ad hoc disaster assistance programs that we have? Does that permanent safety net really help alleviate the necessity of pushing substantial changes in the commodity program? At the same time, you already mentioned it, the scope of ad hoc assistance is sort of, to force a bad pun, it has trumped everything else in the safety net in terms of size. How do we figure out what the sort of formal safety net really looks like when some of it's dependent on a farm bill, some of it's permanent, and some of it's ad hoc?
Yeah, this is a bit of a Gordian knot, I think, at the end of the day. The difference between Title I and crop insurance was always relatively clear, right? Crop insurance can't handle multi-year price decline just by the nature of insurance. And so that's why you had this Title I we had these Title I programs. They could handle those multi-year declines, and you still had crop insurance there as sort of your rapid response to weather disasters, single year price declines, and whatnot. And so that was always pretty clear. But then ad hoc assistance has come into play. And I think that sometimes with ad hoc disaster assistance, it's a very imperfect tool for a variety of reasons. But I think one of the reasons it's imperfect is because the faster you get money out, the less targeted that money is. So USDA always wants to get disaster money out right away. And in order to do that, you have to create a very simple equation and a very simple system that may or may not get money to the right people. It may get money to people that are already perfectly well covered under crop insurance and Title I, and they've already been, if not made whole, they're doing okay. And it might miss people who really actually do need a check. But in order to refine those programs, it takes more time, which then
Well, as an example, the Farmer Bridge Assistance, it's simple to create a calculation that sends out payments to program crop producers.
that's
It's
right.
really difficult to figure out how to send out assistance to specialty crop producers.
Yep. It is very difficult, and it takes a lot more time. And so I just kind of worry with ad hoc assistance. Like I don't ever want to see us fall into a habit where ad hoc assistance is just considered a regular part of our farm policy. Because again, I think if that's where we are, we need to be looking at different permanent solutions to that are more regular, more predictable. And I also sidebar, and I've started to hear some economists pick up on this, which makes me happy. But I also worry that just pumping a lot of money very quickly into the ag economy feeds inflation in the system at a time when, quite frankly, we've got our own problems with inflation without that. We've certainly heard case studies, right, of farmers negotiating lower cash rents and almost being signed on the dotted line until the day the FBA payments were announced. And it doesn't take more than a back of the envelope for a landlord to figure out what amount of money that means in a farmer's pocket, and all of a sudden it gets built right back into land rents. So, I just think sometimes it's a necessary way to handle farm policy. It is not a good regular way to handle farm policy.
I saw on social media a month or two ago that people were saying you have to plan if you want to be eligible for future payments that have been promised. And that for economists, that's like, oh my God. You don't like
Heart
to hear that.
palpitations. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to sort of ask a question about a different area of the Farm Bill that before I was retired, pretty close to my heart. And that is, as we look back historically, we've had this 2% increase in annual productivities for the past 50 years, fueled for the most part by public investment in research and extension work and also the private sector. Now, here recently, we've seen, of course, China and even the European Union spends more on innovation in agriculture than the U.S. does. And so, what are the prospects for innovation in the Farm Bill as we look forward? Or are we going to continue to rely more on private sector corporations and multinationals to fund our research initiative here in this country versus other countries? Or what kind of play is that getting in the farm?
Yeah. This has been an ongoing frustration, I think, in ag circles is research funding. We've got someone here on our team who is far and away better versed in research spending and the research environment. But I think it has been a frustration, and everybody says research is a priority. The problem is here in DC, where it seems to break down is you got a lot of priorities, and where is it on the priority list? And it tends to, when we have an ag economy that looks like what the ag economy looks like today, it ends up lower on the list, and therefore We've just not seen it get the attention and the oomph that I think it deserves. We just saw a president's budget come out that wasn't particularly helpful for research. We're seeing appropriators working on ways to cut back, and sometimes research can get caught in those crosshairs as well. So I wish I could be optimistic and tell you I see some, really amazing outlook in this farm bill for research spending. I think we've made strides in a couple of areas, facilities being one of them, but there's so much work left to do, Mark. So much work left to do on that front. Open to ideas on how to move it higher on the priority list.
Yeah, sort of a similar question. I know it's been on the ag priority list the last couple of years, really relates to ag labor. Earlier this year on dealing with H2A, sort of from the ag perspective, is that one of the amendments into the Farm Bill, or is that going to be separate, or how does that figure into?
Yeah, so there are a couple of amendments filed on H2A and on ag labor issues in general. Of course, they're out of jurisdiction of the Ag Committee, so it would really require leadership signing off on allowing a vote on an amendment that is out of jurisdiction of the Ag Committee. I don't know if I see that happening, to be honest with you. And you all have, I'm sure, heard Chairman Thompson's been trying to work on an ag labor bill for a while now, trying to work with the Judiciary Committee, which is the committee that does have jurisdiction, to get something moving. But with the Farm Bill moving, so much of that has gone to the back burner. And so it would really require, again, leadership letting it go, Judiciary Committee saying, sure, go ahead, vote on this amendment. So I'm not feeling great about prospects in a Farm Bill. Hopefully, if House Agriculture Committee gets a Farm Bill done and their plates are open for other legislative priorities, we see them do a bit more on ag labor, hopefully in conjunction with Judiciary Committee. We're overdue. This is another one of those that I feel like I've been in DC 30 years now, and at least 20 of my 30, I think we've been kind of washing and repeating these same issues. It's frustrating.
Do you see there was substantial cuts to nutrition programs in OB3 in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in July? And the way that I've been talking about that is like this could affect the Farm Bill coalition moving forward, that it could become a less bipartisan process, but I feel like it's to be determined. Have you seen anything, or do you have any thoughts on how that might play out?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this bill is going to be less bipartisan than previous farm bills because of those nutrition cuts. There's kind of no way around it. We've had groups up on the Hill, clients up on the Hill all week. And when we asked folks if they were going to vote for the farm bill, if they said no, it was almost always because of nutrition or pesticides, one of the two. And I think that this is also the issue with doing farm policy in reconciliation. We always used to say, and as a Pat Roberts staffer, the mantra was, you never open a farm bill. Once you write it, that's it. You do not open a farm bill for reconciliation or for anything else, because once you do, no holds barred. It can be, anything could come down the pike. And so it was always a bright red line that we never crossed. And, it got crossed. And when did we do the Inflation Reduction Act? 22?
Yep.
2021, 2022? It got crossed.
Yep.
In the Inflation Reduction Act. And, maybe for really good purposes, to add conservation dollars. Folks support conservation programs. I get it. But you cross that line. And it was a partisan process. And then what happens next? Flipping parties, another opportunity to have at it at reconciliation. Everybody's feeling chapped that it was partisan before, so we're going to make it super partisan again. And next thing you know, you've sort of got this snowball, and you've got a lot of hard feelings, and you've got a lot of hardened policy positions that just, I don't think, lead us to the best policy at the end of the day. So that's the part I wish we could kind of go back on. I loved working on Ag Committee because we had really fabulous bipartisan relationships, and we'd fight, but then we'd go have a beer and we'd work it out and we'd move on and we'd compromise. And that's the part that's sort of broken down.
So, Tara, if I could take that further with you, we yearn for normal order. We yearn for bipartisan collaboration, if not consensus, on moving farm legislation with potential prospects. I won't ask you to judge the probabilities, but with prospects of potential change in control in Congress after this fall's elections, maybe in both chambers. The at least currently identified likely leadership from the Democratic side would be a substantial change relative to current leadership. You work in an organization that has to learn how to and works represent groups that have to learn how to work with both parties. How does agriculture look ahead and figure out how would they work with potentially very different leaders under Democratic control in Congress?
Yeah, I mean, within crop insurance, we always talk about the fact that, we have Democratic supporters, we have Republican supporters, we have Democratic naysayers and Republican naysayers, right? We've got to be able to cross the aisle. We can't make this a political issue. The first thing that helps is kind of staying in your lane and talking about crop insurance. We don't go up to the hill and talk about nutrition policy. We don't go talk about research policy. You kind of got to stay in your lane and talk about the issues that um, so that you're not carrying around baggage that isn't yours to kind of carry. And you got to be diligent about those relationships. We haven't stopped going to visit Democrat offices or doing Democrat fundraisers just because Republicans are in charge. You can't let your guard down like that. And vice versa was the same thing when we had a trifecta on the Dem side. You got to keep up those relationships and really think of it as a partnership.
One of the things that I'm kind of interested in as agriculture changes, we've had emergence of organic agriculture, and now the latest buzzword is regenerative agriculture, and we have a whole host of specialty crops out there. You have livestock that's entering contracting to reduce risk. Gee whiz, I think there's about 150 poultry barns built to California standards between eastern Nebraska and western Iowa that helps to reduce the risk. How do you see the ag risk management area changing? Will we see more contracting in the future? Is that the direction we're heading to reduce risk and crop insurance and insurance tools? How does that all move forward in future farm bills? And maybe there's some provisions to facilitate that in the current proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think crop insurance is definitely a piece of that. Through OB3, the reconciliation package, we saw some expansion and some opportunities for folks to maybe get more risk management through crop insurance that would hopefully, again, help alleviate disaster assistance. Thinking specifically about the supplemental coverage option and the increased premium discounts available there, also available under ECO, which will, help farmers get more coverage at a little bit less of a price, in hopes that they're managing their own risk and we don't need so much ad hoc assistance at the end of the day. That's the idea. This year's a bit of an experiment. This is the first year that's been in place. So I think we'll have a really interesting case study coming out of this year with those policies in place. But it is about more than crop insurance, right? It depends on the commodity. It depends on your type of agriculture and where you are. And I think crop insurance is a wonderful tool because it's really flexible and can grow and to meet different needs. But I have to think after this year's fertilizer situation, for example, folks are going to be looking at more forward contracting on inputs, and hopefully that will carry over into other areas as well. I have to think that folks are looking at any risk management tool they can get their hands on in this current environment. And I think there are some bits and pieces of that in the existing farm bill that we're going to take to the floor hopefully next week.
Some of the conservation incentives that are coming out would lead one to believe that perhaps we can cut back on fertilizer, NP and K, with the idea of adding biologicals in the process. And in sort of the conservation programs, do you see that developing in this year's Farm Bill?
I think that that's another option that we have on the table that, again, 5 years ago, biologicals were what? 8 years ago, 7 years ago when we did the last Farm Bill, where were biologicals, right? I mean, this is a technological advancement that is a perfect example of why we need to do a farm bill every few years, because we need to make sure that those kinds of products are taken into account in conservation programs or in other incentive programs so that folks can use those. Look at the policy and adjust it accordingly. We're leaving all that stuff behind. So I think there are a couple of amendments on biostimulants as well. Just don't quiz me on what exactly they are right now. There were 340 amendments filed, and I skimmed all of them, but I'm not going to tell you I wrote all the amendments.
Well, Tara, at the end of the day, generic question here, what do you hope to see emerge from this Farm Bill round? What would be the most important thing that you would like to see result from what happens starting hopefully next week?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the goal here is to get it actually across the finish line. And I think there are a lot of good pieces in every title of the Farm Bill that we're working on right now. But to be really honest with you, I hope we get it done so that we can all take a bit of a deep breath and maybe everybody has an opportunity to kind of go to their corners, and some of the political hard feelings that have come out of this Farm Bill through the reconciliation processes, both of them, we can maybe get in the rearview mirror and really start looking ahead to the next Farm Bill and how we can get back to a bipartisan process.
Yep.
Perhaps very naive of me after 30 years in this town, but a girl's got to try.
I have a follow-up on that. There's a question I always ask at the end of my Smoking Mirrors podcast. So let's say you get to change one policy. One thing, if you could fix it, what would that be?
Oh, that's really hard.
Yeah, I usually give people advance warning, so sorry.
Yeah, wait a minute here. I got a little heads up on some of the other questions. I did not on this one. And we have so many clients that I feel like if I pick one, I'm going to get in trouble from another one. Maybe actually seeing something that's been a big problem for a while get managed in this Farm Bill, whether it be E15 issues or whether it be ag labor. If we could get something really big sort of off the plate for the foreseeable future, that would be just fabulous. Some of these things that have dogged us for just a really long time.
Absolutely.
I have a question about the coalition. I know back in the 70s, we started with adding farm and environment, and then rural development. Conservation has been there for over a century. As you build a Farm Bill coalition, you've got nutrition programs in there. How does, in the future, how does the Freedom Caucus, what's their primary objectives? Is that primarily just a reduction in spending? How does ag relate to the Freedom Caucus? I mean, how do you build a coalition when everybody's pushing for something and then somebody's kind of going the opposite direction?
Yeah, the Freedom Caucus it's always primarily been a cost issue for them. They don't like the spending on nutrition, and they don't like the spending on farm programs either, by the way. They just generally don't like the spending. Past farm bills, I think the fewest Republicans we've lost is 20. They're thinking they're going to lose. And it's always been the Freedom Caucus crowd, right? That just isn't going to get there. I think they think they've got more of the Freedom Caucus locked down this go round. But that's where being able to work in a bipartisan fashion really helps. Because if you've got the caucus of no, and you're going to have to work around that caucus. And when you have a vote margin of 2, there's only one other place to go, and that's to Democrats. And so we've got to have a little bit of bipartisanship in this process, because you are just always going to have folks that'll vote no on a farm bill. Period.
Interesting.
Fingers crossed.
That's why it's always important to count votes before you vote.
That's right. That is right.
Anything further, panel?
It's been a good discussion, but
So this has been insightful once again, as we had hoped it would be. And we thank you very much, Tara, for joining us and lending your obviously valuable perspective on this. And we wish you the best of luck in bringing all the forces together for a happy result to this Farm Bill deliberation. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. I love these kinds of discussions, so appreciate the time.
And panel, thank you as always. Tara Smith has been our special guest. She is with the Tory Advocacy Group in Washington, D.C., very well expertised in the area of farm policy. Also thanks to Brad Lubin of the University of Nebraska, Mark Edelman of Iowa State University, and Jenny Ift of Kansas State University. We would remind you once again to check out all of the valuable features in the website for Flinchball Center, and that is flinchballcenter.com, and see what you can find there. There's some really good stuff there to take in if you would. My name's Eric Atkinson from Kansas State University. Thank you for joining us, and please join us again next month for another Clearing the Air on Agricultural Policy.